Ochako took another shuddering breath. It was over. Why was she still trembling? Class 1A was spread out in front of the USJ while police officers and medical personnel milled around, assessing wounds and taking statements. A sense of chaos still reigned among the students despite Ida's efforts to get them into some semblance of organization. Briefly, Uraraka pondered that he would make a good class representative. But that was the only thing that really registered in Ochako's mind. She could barely hear over her racing heart and ragged breathing. She was startled into awareness, though, when something dropped onto her shoulders, not alarming, but unexpected. She blinked at the orange blanket that now covered her shoulders, then at the boy who stood in front of her. "I'm sorry to startle you. I tried talking to you earlier, but you weren't responding. You were going into shock." He smiled slightly, running a hand through a forest of green hair. Off in the distance an explosion sounded, a sure sign that Bakugo was fine. The boy in front of her flinched, but he wore an expression of recognition. Ochako's mind was too addled to properly decipher the boy in front of her. "You need to sit down. Let's go over to the shade," the boy suggested, pointing to the right direction. It was a little cluster of trees that would simultaneously provide shade and block her from the sight of others. It was also still within the boundaries of where they could go, making it the perfect haven. Maybe the boy had ulterior motives, but Ochako got the sense he was giving her privacy to deal with her emotions, and she was grateful beyond words. It was also hard to believe that this boy could have anything but the best intentions. At first glance, he was around her age, and pretty plain looking. His hair was messy, and freckles were liberally sprinkled across his skin, but his eyes were a deep green that for whatever reason felt incredibly comfortable to Ochako. She found herself looking into them, blaming it all on the shock. He situated her comfortable on the ground, seemingly not noticing her attention. "Does anything hurt?" Thinking for a moment, Ochako shakily raised her right arm. "I did something to my wrist. I don't know if it's broken." The boy gently took the appendage in his hands, gently rolling back her sleeve. "I'm an EMT, by the way. I'm not just some random kid. Your wrist isn't broken, it's just a pretty nasty sprain." "Give me a second and all." The boy trailed off, his eyebrows furrowed in concentration as he procured a fabric bandage, expertly wrapping her fingers with nimble fingers, his lips silently moving. Ochako once again found herself fixated on him, fascinated. As he worked, his face grew more animated, more defined, and it was like she was looking at a completely different person. When he was finished, Ochako gingerly moved her wrist. "Wow, it almost doesn't hurt at all. Thank you. It's no problem." It was also probably unnecessary. "Someone like Recovery Girl will probably heal it in a matter of seconds," the boy mumbled. "Does anything else hurt?" Ochako smiled with a false brightness. "I'm fine." She expected that to be the end of things, but it wasn't. Midoriya cocked his head to the side, looking at her intently. "But you're not." That made her reel in shock. Most of the time when Ochako's world was falling apart and she insisted everything was fine, everyone believed her, including her parents. She was always fine, that was how she dealt with life. "I know it seems easier to pretend everything is okay and just deal with it alone, but it's not. That's actually something I just learned recently. You just went through something traumatic, you can admit that you're not okay." "I don't think any less of you," he said, that kind smile laced with untold emotion. Against her will, Ochako's eyes filled with tears. Before her mind could stop her, she threw herself at the boy, needing to be near someone that was alive. "They all wanted to kill us," she sobbed, wiping her tears with the orange blanket. It was only slightly scratchy against her skin. "There were so many of them, and they were all ready to kill us." "You're safe now," the boy murmured. "They're gone now and your whole class is safe." The two stayed like that for a while longer, Ochako sobbing to a total stranger. Finally she pulled away, once again wiping away her tears. He smiled at her, a kind smile that he clearly had no idea of how beautiful it was. "Little Midoriya, stop flirting back there, an energetic voice called before a police officer appeared between the trees. She was tall with long dark hair pulled into a ponytail and piercing orange eyes. The boy immediately shoved himself backwards, his face instantly burning bright red. Saito, I wasn't flirting, he stammered. She sprained her wrist. Saito's lips quirked up in amusement. She had observed little Midoriya for a while before she announced her presence. The whole time he had been totally concentrated, probably not even noticing that the person he'd been helping was a girl. He had handled her emotions like a pro, better than some seasoned cops Saito knew. But now that the poor boy was done, it had registered that a cute girl was sitting in front of him, and little Midoriya was about to mentally shut down. Taking pity on him, Saito said, "Go on, little Midoriya. I need to get her statement, so you can go in." "No." The girl nearly shouted, grabbing the boy's arm unconsciously. "I mean, can he stay? He's comforting." Izuku obediently sat down next to the girl, face still warm. He studiously didn't look at her. He didn't think he could meet her eyes ever again, especially not after Saito's comment. "Remember, this is all confidential, Midoriya," Saito said seriously. "Okay, let's start with you telling me your name, and then you can tell me what happened today." "My name is Uraraka Ochako," she said, swallowing thickly. It was a surprise. We came to the USJ for rescue training with Mr. Aizawa, 13, and All Might." Saito noticed how Midoriya winced at the mention of the number 1 hero, and filed the information away for further investigation in the future. Before the teachers could tell us what to do, there was this weird black mist, and then villains came out of nowhere. There were so many of them. All Might and Mr. Aizawa held off most of them while 13 tried to get us out, but the Warp Gate villain got us and sent us to all different parts of the USJ. I got sent to the earthquake simulation, and there were so many villains. I was there with Tokiyami and Ojiro. Together we stayed alive until All Might took care of the big black thing and we were all saved. The hand guy and the mist guy got away though, she said with a frown. I wasn't very close to the action, so I don't have anything very helpful to say. Everything is helpful, Officer Saito said with a kind smile. I think I'll go find this Ojiro and Tokiyami so I can have all of your statements together. Come along and assess their injuries, little Midoriya. If they're who I think they are, then they haven't been seen to yet. When he checked her over one more time, Ochako assured the boy that she was mostly fine now, and she was. But for whatever reason when he left, she found her eyes following the boy instinctively, feeling the slightest bit bereft. Something about the boy fascinated her, and she didn't even know his name. He chattered about Ojiro to the police officer. Apparently the strange EMT knew one of her classmates. Ochako herself didn't know Ojiro very well. He was one of the more quiet members of the class. He was kind and respectful, but quiet. Sure enough, the strange boy spoke with Ojiro comfortably as he disinfected a few scrapes, even drawing a laugh out of the other boy. Ochako hadn't known Ojiro very long, but she didn't think she'd ever seen him laugh. What had the police officer called him? Little Midori? It fit, with eyes and hair, but Ochako doubted it would be helpful in finding the boy again. After seeing to Ojiro and Tokiyami, from what she could gather, the boy left to report back to Mr. Aizawa. Ochako would never have been able to pick him out if she hadn't been following Midori's destination. He was only briefly slowed when All Might laughed, flinching at the sudden sound. He ducked out of sight, to Ochako's sadness. Do you want me to take a look at that arm, dear? Recovery girl asked, startling Ochako out of her observations. The girl unconsciously clutched the wrist to her chest, taking comfort in the bandage wrapped around it. The EMT cleared me. If it bothers me tomorrow I'll come see you. Right now I'm sure that others need you more. Recovery girl nodded, glancing at the bandage wrapped around her wrist. He's a capable one, it seems, efficient too. I'm of half a mind to give him some medical field training. The highly unusual boy. Chapter 7. Ojiro smiled at his friend. Thanks, Midoriya. You're a lifesaver. Just remember what Sensei said about using your tail like that, Izuku said firmly. It's flexible, but you have to be careful not to overextend it. I know, the blonde groaned. I just got caught up in the moment. Do you have any injuries? Izuku asked the bird-headed boy. Not affects my immortal soul, he intoned. A bird-like shadow burst from the boy. He's too embarrassed to tell you that he tripped on some rubble and scraped his hands and knees really badly. Dark shadow, the boy hissed in betrayal, but Izuku was already pulling out bandages and disinfectant. Don't worry, I promise I've done things 100 times more embarrassing. Just ask Ojiro. It's true. Tokiyami allowed Izuku to begin treating his scrapes, glancing between Ojiro and Izuku. You said your name is Midoriya? Yeah. You're quite the interesting character. It's rare to find certified medical personnel at such a young age. Yet on top of that, you seem to have already fostered a relationship with the police officers present. I feel that you have quite the tale to tell, Midoriya. Oh, it's nothing too interesting, nothing compared to your quirk, Izuku said, watching Dark Shadow with bright eyes. I've never seen anything like it. Does little Midoriya? One of the officers interrupted, looking incredibly weary. The detective wants to see you once you're finished here. He nodded at the officer, an older gentleman with a twinkle in his eye despite how tired he seemed. I'll go find him, thanks Officer Soma. Placing the last bandage on Tokiyami's knee, the boy smiled ruefully. I need to remember I'm here for a job. It was a pleasure meeting you, Tokiyami. If we ever meet when I'm not on duty, I would love to ask you about your quirk. Ojiro, see you tomorrow. Bye. Ojiro and Tokiyami watched silently as Midoriya left to seek out the detective, pausing only to hunt down a blanket so Hagakure had something to wear other than her gloves and shoes. He was making a beeline for the detective when he spotted Todoroki attempting to dress his own wounds. What an interesting specimen of life, the bird-headed boy said, red eyes fixed on the green-haired one. Yeah, you could say that, Ojiro said, his lips upturned as he watched his friend. What do you think you're doing? Izuku nearly screeched at Todoroki. I'm applying bandages, the boy said with no emotion whatsoever. By yourself? You just went through a traumatic experience and you're surrounded by trained medical personnel, Izuku lectured, taking the bandages out of the boy's hand. He carefully unraveled what had already been wrapped. Wrapping something like this properly is almost impossible to do on your own. I'll be fine either way, I'm going to see Recovery Girl any minute now. You can't always rely on healing quirks. Recovery Girl won't always be there, you need to, Izuku trailed off, examining the boy's arms. You're covered in burns and bruises, but there's no way these happen today unless you have some sort of self-healing quirk. I never said I got wounded today. The smaller boy looked into the different colored eyes, a deep sadness shining in his green ones. He unconsciously patted Todoroki's arm as some sort of gesture of comfort before hardening his mouth in a line. These are never going to heal properly if you keep wrapping them like this. I'll show you how to do it on yourself, but if you can't do it right, you have to find someone to help you. Then Izuku was running, finally making it to the detective. He wove around students that were calming down for the most part. Luckily Detective Tsukauchi was out of sight of both All Might and Kachan. Izuku didn't want to keep his presence a secret necessarily, but it was a big day for him. He had just gotten his EMT certification and he was putting it to use for the first time. He didn't want today to be spoiled by either of them. Detective Tsukauchi was talking to a man with long, wild black hair, apparently almost finished with taking his statement. Izuku found himself staring at the man. He seemed familiar. He was also favoring one of his arms heavily. The man stopped telling his story, pausing when he noticed Izuku. Who's the kid? I'm Midoriya Izuku, he said before Tsukauchi could respond for him. Then he caught the barest glimpse of something nestled underneath the man's scarves. I'm a certified EMT, and you're Eraserhead, aren't you? I hadn't heard you were teaching at UA. I'm a huge fan. If I weren't on duty I would have probably fainted at this point. Midoriya is trustworthy, Aizawa, Tsukauchi promised. He's the kid who found the Tanaka girl. If you insist he's trustworthy, I'll believe you. But that's the extent of my story, the tired teacher said. If you'll excuse me. Wait. Izuku said. You need someone to see to your arm. I understand if you don't want me to, but it needs attention. Eraserhead stared Izuku down. My arm? Yeah, it looks like some sort of disintegration quirk. You look dead on your feet, so recovery girl can't heal it all right now, but if you don't have something to compress the damaged portion, your nerves may never fully recover. The pro hero blinked at the deluge of information before offering his arm. Go for it, kid. Izuku procured a small roll of gauze, nimble fingers wrapping the man's wounded elbow with just the right amount of tension. While the teen worked, Eraserhead was contemplative. How did you know it was a disintegration quirk? What? Oh, the damage pattern of your sleeve. Fabric doesn't just do that. I couldn't see your elbow because of the shadow your sleeve cast, but you gestured awkwardly, so, he trailed off, physically forcing himself not to mutter in front of Eraserhead. All finished, but see recovery girl after getting some rest. Eraserhead was staring at him intently. Have you ever thought about becoming a hero? The boy smiled bittersweetly. It was all I dreamed about when I was younger. But I am quirkless, and I was told by a certain pro that it was impossible. His smile quivered, the hurt obviously still fresh. I'm aiming to become a detective instead. I've found that they help people even more than heroes sometimes, and they don't deal with all of the attention, which is really appealing. Aizawa looked Izuku up and down, mentally evaluating him. Kid, you could have done it. If you ever change your mind, let me know. You've got a good head on your shoulders and dedication. Izuku sniffed, swiping at some stray tears. That means a lot, Eraserhead. But for now I'm more than happy with the path I'm on. Maybe we'll even work together in the future. Also, one of your students, the short boy with purple hair? I noticed he was stuck to Officer Sasaki. If you want your student alive, you'll want to take care of the situation. Tsukauchi paled. Sasaki has a reputation for breaking limbs for unwanted advances. Eraserhead sighed, a deep, bone-weary sigh. I'll be back. Wide green eyes turned to Tsukauchi. What did you need, detective? You know you can just call me Tsukauchi, Midoriya, he said, pausing briefly. You still want to be a detective, don't you? Izuku was practically bouncing. Absolutely. I've got an opportunity for you, the detective said carefully. We're beginning a new program, a provisional police officer system. It's a bit like the provisional hero licenses. You would go through the police academy and afterward you would have the same authority as a rookie police officer. Really? I hadn't heard of this. It was just barely approved, Tsukauchi said, suddenly nervous for some reason. And if you're willing, we'd like you to be our first provisional police officer. The boy's mouth fell open and stayed that way until more voices broke into the conversation. You already told him? Dang it, Tsukauchi, we agreed you would wait until we were all here. No, you agreed to that, Saito. You knew there was a good chance that Midoriya would leave before we gathered everyone together. I think you broke our boy, detective. Izuku finally closed his mouth, looking around at all of the police officers surrounding him. Tears were already streaming down his face. I can really be one of you? Saito ruffled his hair. You were already one of us, little Midoriya. We were all panicking a bit. We didn't know when we would be able to see you once your EMT class finished. Just to be clear, they worried. I wanted you gone, Mori said sourly. That's true. I apologize for briefly forgetting that you're the worst, Mori, Saito said with a smile. But you still have one more statement to get, right? You were in charge of getting it from that kid with the electric quirk. What? He's mentally gone, there's no way. You two should get along famously then. Saito said, bodily shoving the man away. Izuku, still crying, smiled at the officers surrounding him. Thank you. Thank you all. Sasaki coalesced on the group, muttering, stupid grape kid. Next time I'll, wait, little Midoriya is crying? You told him without me? I thought we were going to wait. Chapter 8. What Inko had feared would be a lonely, isolated life for her son turned out to be more full than she could have ever imagined. Izuku seemed to make friends daily, coming home with excited exhaustion and stories upon stories to tell. Unsurprisingly, Izuku currently sat at the top of his class in the police academy. He was still working through high school at an absurd pace, actually ahead of schedule, leaving him more time to work on his college classes. He still always made time for martial arts. The dojo was essentially another family to Izuku, just like the police station. Inko couldn't be more glad that they had chosen this rather unconventional lifestyle. Her baby was happy again, and he was surrounded by people who saw more than his quirklessness. And more were coming every day. It seemed that Izuku was always asking permission to help someone with something, or someone wanted to give him additional training of some sort. She'd already gotten phone calls from Recovery Girl and Eraserhead separately asking her permission for training. It seemed Recovery Girl had her heart set on training Izuku to be a field medic, while Eraserhead had only met Izuku briefly, but had been vastly impressed. He wanted to supplement Izuku's martial arts training, apparently horrified at the thought of his potential being wasted. She was grateful to the two beyond words, especially as they had each promised to train Izuku's self-sacrificing streak out of him, whatever Tsukauchi didn't manage to. She hadn't told him about the offers yet, she wanted it to be a surprise for her boy. He deserved all of the happiness life could afford him. Everyone wanted a hand in helping Izuku, and it blindsided the little Midoriya family. Mom, Izuku called from another room. It sounded like he was on the phone. Gunhead wonders if I can help him train the hero students with him on Monday. Aren't you leaving for Hosu on Monday? This would be Monday morning. I could catch the train to Hosu right afterwards, Izuku explained. Oh, and Detective Tsukauchi wanted me to ask you if it would be okay if I spend some of my spare time with the Hosu police. Apparently that's where the police chief that approved the provisional program is based. Is it okay with Dr. Meiji? He said as long as he gets me in the mornings that's fine. He teaches in the afternoon, so that's when I would be with the police. Inko considered it for a moment. It's fine with me as long as you promise not to burn yourself out. I promise. Make sure to go to bed early tonight. Inko warned. Your week is going to be extra busy. Of course. He mumbled something into the phone, probably telling Gunhead that he could help out, then he hung up. I'm going for a run now, Mom. Running was becoming one of Izuku's favorite pastimes. It was one of the few things that could clear his head and help him begin to make sense of the madness that was his life. He hadn't been running for long when he realized he wasn't alone. A few blocks down was a familiar-looking boy huffing and puffing much the same way he had when he first started running. Despite the sweat running down the boy's face, however, his purple hair still managed to stand almost straight up. Izuku slowed, trying to place the boy, then it clicked. You're one of the finalists from the UA Sports Festival. Your matches were fascinating. The boy stopped, breathing heavily. However, he still managed to look supremely unimpressed. Nice joke. No, it's not a joke. Izuku said frantically. I know some people might find your quirk unsettling, but the police station and I think it's perfect for heroism. It's discreet, swift, and it will prevent so much damage. The boy raised an eyebrow. The police station? Oh. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and I'm currently training to get a provisional police badge. I spend a lot of time at the police station because of that, so I know the police officers pretty well, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head. Catching his breath, the boy regarded Izuku critically. You're strange. I get that a lot. I'm curious, did you have a plan of what to do if someone had figured out your quirk? Not really. But one of the teachers reached out to me and offered to train me in hand-to-hand combat. Awesome. If you ever want to spar, I go to Valiant's dojo a few blocks that way. I've already learned a lot from him. The boy considered for a moment before breaking back into a light jog. Izuku took this as an invitation to join the boy and began to jog beside him. He couldn't tell if he was being annoying or not until the boy stopped. This is my house, he said abruptly enough that Izuku could feel the dismissal. The boy was emotionless as he turned away, but at the door of his house, he paused. You can call me Shinso, he said before disappearing through the door. A grin spread across Izuku's face, and there was a spring in his step during the rest of his run. Apparently this was evident when he walked into the police station. Tamikawa was at the front desk that day, and the serious officer inclined his head to Izuku. You're looking more excited than usual, Midoriya. I just met one of the finalists from the UA Sports Festival, he said excitedly. His name is Shinso and he seems really nice. You might want to wait to get to know him before you show him your analysis of his quirk, the cat-headed officer counseled. In fact, that's a good rule of thumb for most people. Izuku rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. I guess I do get ahead of myself sometimes. Don't worry, little Midoriya, we find it endearing, Officer Saito said, materializing to ruffle his hair. And amazing. Your analysis of my quirk was fascinating to read. I can see why that college professor of yours wants to steal you away from us. Nakamura smiled. You're going to be fascinated when Detective Kimura comes back from maternity leave. Her quirk is fascinating. Saito chuckled darkly. I've got my welcome back for Kimura all planned. She'll never see it coming. She just had a baby. You're not doing anything to Kimura, Nakamura told his partner sternly. Besides, if you start another prank war in the station, I'm requesting to be transferred. But you saw what she did to me before she left. Saito protested indignantly. My desk hasn't been the same since. There's another detective at this station? Izuku asked. Oh, no one has told you about Kimura? She's the best homicide detective in the city, possibly in all of Japan, Saito said. Combined with Detective Tsukauchi, our precinct is the best in Musutafu. We were all stationed here because it's one of the safest places in the city. That way it's not so bad when Kimura and Tsukauchi get called to outside cases. The longer Saito spoke, the brighter grew the stars in Izuku's eyes. Really? That's amazing. Hey, don't underestimate us, little Midoriya, Officer Soma warned as he passed, gray eyes playful. The detectives handpicked the officers, except Mori. The police chief forced him on us to straighten him out. Mori glared at his partner, pouting. I was top of my class in the police academy, old man. So were the rest of us, Nakamura warned. And we didn't have such poor scores on cooperation, Saito taunted. We have jobs to do, Mori huffed. We shouldn't be wasting time on some quirkless kid. He's probably not going to make it through the program anyway. Izuku froze along with everyone else, no longer used to his quirklessness being held against him. The other officers reacted more violently, though it was all halted by a sudden burst of cold wind whipping through the room. Officer Soma was using his quirk, Icy Gale, to get everyone's attention. Mori, you're off duty today. Instead, you'll be the meter maid. Mori squawked in indignation. I'm above jobs like. No, you aren't, Soma interrupted, his voice as cold as his quirk. You are a servant of the public, and that means you respect them. Midoriya didn't choose to be quirkless, but he's accomplished amazing things. You were born with some advantages and all you've accomplished today is unsuccessfully bullying a teenager. Think about that while you write tickets. All present officers glared at Mori as he slunk away, some shame on his face. Saito, as usual, was the first to speak. Don't listen to anything he says, little Midoriya. You're going to be the best of us all. A small smile worked its way onto Izuku's face. You know, I'm actually okay. It didn't really bother me. And it was true. Izuku knew his mom had informed a few of the officers about why they had moved, at least as much information as she had. He had no doubt that if any of them knew the full scope of Kachan's bullying, a headhunt would ensue. It was heartwarming. In fact, Izuku's eyes were watering. No, now he was officially crying. Chaos erupted in the station. It's okay, little Midoriya. Don't cry. I'll go punch Mori out for you. Will that make you feel better? Wait, are these happy tears? What's going on, little Midoriya? I'm fine, I promise, Izuku sniffed, swiping at his tears. Thank you all for helping and caring. I've never had that before. Silence fell over the officers as the full implications of his statement sank in. Tsukauchi's office door swung open. What is going on out here? Why is Midoriya crying? The detective demanded. He claims these are happy tears, but the chaos was because Mori was being his usual charming self. The detective scowled. If he was insulting Midoriya, give him meter maid duties for the week. No cases. Soma, Tamikawa will be your partner for now instead. Understood. Finally exhaling, Tsukauchi relaxed, smiling at Midoriya. Come on kid, Tsuramage wanted me to give you a more detailed idea of what to expect in Hosu. Chapter 9. So I heard whispers about a provisional police officer, Gunhead said as casually as one could in the middle of an intensive sparring session. Izuku huffed a laugh, barely audible over his panting. You're not going to distract me. Lightning quick, he blocked the killer strike that would have felled most men. But I'm not an officer yet, I'm just going through the police academy. Taking a step back, the two fighters circled one another, something predatory in their stances. I noticed Ojiro wasn't on your list of interns. In the blink of an eye, Izuku lunged for Gunhead, hoping to throw the man off guard. He should have known it would never work. The pro hero saw it coming a mile away, catching Izuku's arm and using it to fling him onto the mat, his back making an impressively loud slapping noise. A squeak sounded from the doorway, making both fighters look. A group of kids that Izuku recognized as some of Gunhead's dojo students stood with a few hero students. It was hard to tell since Izuku was looking at them upside down. He narrowed his eyes. The girl in front looked familiar. It was the girl Saito and Sasaki had teasingly been calling his girlfriend since the USJ incident. He had made the mistake of watching the sports festival with the police station, and whenever she did anything, the two extolled the virtues of strong women to a degree that made Izuku want to die. Surprisingly, in those moments the most bearable officer was Mori, as he just shushed everyone else. Izuku wondered whether or not he would be able to convince Gunhead to keep quiet about all of this. If Izuku didn't interfere, Gunhead would tell Valiant, who would tell Officer Soma, as the two had a history of working together in the prime of their careers. Soma would gush about it to the rest of the officers, which would be an absolute nightmare. Sasaki and Saito were already practically engraving wedding invitations for Izuku and the girl, based on their short interaction after the USJ incident. Once Detective Tsukauchi heard, he would take it upon himself to have an awkward conversation with Izuku about girls and the proper way to approach such situations, which Izuku was definitely not ready for. When Tsukauchi had learned about Izuku's total lack of paternal direction, he had taken it upon himself to give him the lessons that men needed most. Then somehow, in the midst of it all, his mom would find out, which would lead to a lot of tears and an even more awkward conversation. Gunhead had to be stopped at all costs. Not that Izuku didn't like her based off of their short interaction. She was actually a really cute girl. Was it offensive to call an aspiring hero cute? The point was that the girl had likely been in shock when they had met, and he had been nervous over his first EMT call, and Midoriya. Gunhead interrupted in a murmur, low enough that only Izuku could hear, holding out a hand to help the boy up. Are you okay? You're muttering. You haven't done that in a while. As he clambered to his feet, all of his blood rushed to Izuku's face, which was turning a bright red color that tomatoes would be jealous of. Oh my gosh, you didn't actually hear what I said, did you? Did they? Oh no, you can't tell anyone at the station about this. Please, Gunhead. After a moment, the pro-hero realized just what was going on, somehow blushing through his mask. Is it the hero intern? Do you think she's pretty? Izuku squeaked, burying his face in his hands while the students filed in, taking their places. Ochako hadn't caught any of what was being said, but it took everything in her not to react to how Gunhead and the boy he'd been sparring with were standing. Their poses were just too cute. The boy looked familiar for some reason, though it was hard to pinpoint where Ochako might have known him from when his face was so red. Gunhead stopped whispering to the boy, straightening up. As you all know, you're here to become better fighters, to be more prepared to help people in any situation. Those of you that are training to become heroes, pay attention. Too many heroes are overly dependent on their quirks, but as pros we should have other means of resolving situations at our disposal. Some quirks, like my own, are too risky to use in many situations. So learn well, it will literally save lives. A weighty silence fell over the room, each participant contemplating the gravity of the situation. Gunhead continued, but we can still enjoy our time together. In fact, I expect it. Today we have a special guest to help you learn. This is Midoriya Izuku. Ochako's head snapped up at the name Midoriya. That's where she knew him from. He was the EMT who helped her after the USJ. But why was he here? Was Gunhead expecting them to get hurt that badly? All eyes were on the two at the front until Gunhead nudged Izuku. You're supposed to introduce yourself. Oh. He stammered. Like Gunhead said, I'm Midoriya Izuku. I've been practicing martial arts for just about a year now, so I'm by no means an expert, but I look forward to helping each of you. Midoriya's nervous habits were confusing to Ochako. He had been so confident after the USJ, but now he could barely form a full sentence. Regardless, Ochako felt strangely compelled to get to know him better. We only have Midoriya for today, unfortunately, so he is going to help me demonstrate the most important things you need to know, Gunhead said. Remember to only use Gunhead martial arts, Midoriya. We don't want to confuse them with all of your fancy techniques. Got it. You can be the attacker first, Izuku offered. Are you sure? Izuku stretched. I need to work on my defense against knives. Let's do it. Ochako tensed as Gunhead produced a knife that certainly looked real and rushed Midoriya. However, in a blur of green motion, Midoriya held the knife in one hand, and with the other he held Gunhead at arm's length. One of the boys blinked. Wait, what just happened? This is what we're going to show you, Gunhead said. Midoriya is going to come at me a lot more slowly than I came at him, and we'll go through every movement. They continued like that for some time, demonstrating the most vital moves. When he thought it was sufficient, Gunhead said, Okay, pair up and let's practice. Immediately all of the attention in the room snapped to Midoriya with the same desperation of people who wanted, nay, needed, the smart kid in their group for a school project. However, for whatever reason, Gunhead pushed the boy forward. You're going to work with Uraraka. Izuku flushed, nodding. He shuffled over to the girl, not daring to meet her eyes. That didn't stop Ochako, though. You're that boy that helped me after the USJ. I thought you were an EMT. What are you doing here? The whole EMT thing is just a hobby, kind of like martial arts, Izuku said, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. Internally, though, he was celebrating. He was successfully talking to a girl. Awkwardly, he offered her the knife. You try attacking first, so you can get a feel for the motions. As the two practiced the motions again and again, Ochako couldn't help but wonder about this boy. Before he took the knife from her, she was awed at his easy, fluid movements. After, she was fascinated, and thankful, by his control. Every movement was deliberate, and his eyes held mass amounts of intelligence. It was when they were taking a quick breather that Ochako finally worked up the courage to ask him the question that had been haunting her. Why? What do you want to do if being an EMT is just a hobby? Well, I originally wanted to be a hero, he said, slowly hunching in on himself. I wanted to be one for as long as I can remember. But that's just not possible for me. What? You're really talented, Midoriya. Why would you think you couldn't be a hero? Ochako asked. I'm quirkless, he said, smiling bitterly. I had plans, ways to become a hero without one, but a certain pro told me it just wasn't possible. But I wanted to be a hero to help people, to save them. Heroism isn't the only way to do that, so I'm learning all of the things I can that might help someone one day. My goal now is actually to be a detective. Ochako couldn't help but smile at how bright the boy in front of her was. She was sad to hear his story, true, but she could already tell he was going to be a great detective. However, she felt conflicted. Before today, if someone had asked if a quirkless person could be a hero, Ochako would have probably said no. But something told her Midoriya could have done it. After all, she had classmates that probably wouldn't stand a chance against him sparring. After all, quirks weren't everything. Throughout this conversation, neither teenager noticed that Gunhead was listening in, taking note of every word. He wanted nothing more than to find whatever hero had hurt Midoriya so deeply and shake them. He had no doubt that Valiant would feel the same way. Izuku and Ochako continued practicing, casually talking throughout. I never got the chance to ask you, what's your quirk? It's called zero gravity, she said. I'm sure you can guess what it does. Ochako liked her quirk, but it was nowhere near as impressive as Bakugo's or Todoroki's. But Midoriya had stars in his eyes. He opened his mouth, 1,000 questions dancing on his lips when he saw a clock. Oh no, I'm going to be late. I have to catch a train, but I would love to hear about your quirk. I have so many questions. Suddenly Gunhead was there. Why don't you give her your number? The boy startled at the sudden presence of the hero, emitting a little squeak. Gunhead, what are you? You're going to be late, Midoriya. Just give her your number, the hero said, pressing pen and paper into his hand. Nodding, Izuku hurriedly scribbled his number and pressed it into Uraraka's hands before yelling his goodbyes and sprinting out the door. As he ran, it fully registered what he'd just done. He'd just given away his number. A cute girl had his number. He thought about that almost the whole train ride to Hosu, but once he was there he had to really concentrate. Izuku found himself on the college campus with little recollection of how he had gotten there, excitement building every second he stood there. Maybe he was being overly dramatic, but Izuku couldn't help but feel that this was the true beginning of a new portion of his life. Even more than starting the police academy, Izuku felt like this was what would get him where he wanted to be. He had always pictured going to UA as the next step to his future, but somehow this felt right. He couldn't wait to meet Dr. Meiji in person and really start his college career in earnest. Izuku stepped forward eagerly, clutching his backpack and duffel bag, once more incredibly grateful for how lucky he'd been thus far in life. But it seemed that the boy's life could never be easy, nor simple. He had no idea what the rest of the week held in store for him. Debatably, the worst misfortune of all was that Izuku had forgotten to talk to Gunhead about not sharing sensitive information. Whoops. Chapter 10. Stepping onto campus was practically a religious experience. Izuku clutched his tattered yellow backpack tightly as he adjusted his new, equally yellow fanny pack, anxiety plaguing him. Part of him whispered that it was some sort of elaborate prank, and his scholarship was going to be yanked out of his hands. But he couldn't think that way, he had to live in the moment. At least, that was what Sasaki kept insisting. He slowly found his way towards what he hoped was the correct building. Today alone, he was supposed to sit in on one of Meiji's classes, to see the classroom firsthand. Izuku picked what he hoped was the correct hallway, scanning room numbers. There was the right classroom. Luckily, he had only made it a few minutes late. He was going to sneak in and do his best to avoid attention, but that plan was aborted when he stumbled upon entering the room. He managed to catch himself, but the noise he made turned all eyes on him. He swallowed thickly, internally hoping for the sweet release of death. Is this foundational quirk studies? The professor, a composed older gentleman, turned around. Midoriya, you made it. Come, sit. Class, I want to introduce you to the author of Analysis 18. All students immediately snapped their attention to him. There's no way, said a girl with magenta hair. He's like 12. I'm 15, Izuku mumbled, sitting down in one of the only seats left. Naturally, it was right in the front. Midoriya is undeniably the author of Analysis 18, Dr. Meiji said. He's here today as a guest, so be respectful. Someone in the back snorted. He's probably got some analysis quirk. Izuku bit his lip, unsure whether or not to speak up. He settled on simply listening, taking notes on everything Dr. Meiji was saying. He could feel the other students staring at him. He just hoped it wouldn't get as violent as middle school had been. As it was, Izuku desperately wanted to participate in the class, but old habits die hard. Besides, he didn't even want to think about what kind of retaliation college students would be capable of. Izuku managed to stay silent until Dr. Meiji asked him point blank, Midoriya, based on this picture, what would you say these two people's quirks are? He studied the picture, a scene from a high school hallway. It featured two students, a boy with barely visible fangs and slitted pupils and a girl with downcast eyes. The boy has a minor snake quirk. I would guess he produces a weak venom, but nothing that has changed his physiology too much. Class? The student with magenta hair from earlier scoffed. It could also be something like a cat quirk. Yes, it could be if it weren't the faint scale pattern peeking out from his shirt collar, Izuku pointed out. And what of the girl? Meiji asked. It could be some kind of emitter type, one student hesitantly ventured. Or some mental quirk? Meiji listened to several more suggestions before asking, what do you think, Midoriya? She's quirkless, he said simply. What? That's not very likely. Dr. Meiji quieted them down before saying, now tell us why you think this, Midoriya. Well, there's no evidence of a quirk, but most of all it's about her body language. The way she's junched in on herself, and it looks like she's nervously moving her fingers, it all screams quirkless. She could have a quirk people bully her for it though. Or she could just be anxious, someone said. Izuku shrugged. There's an unspoken connection between quirkless people. We just recognize each other on sight. I can't explain it. The class stared at him in stunned silence until Meiji clapped his hands. Unfortunately, class is over now. Remember your third analysis is due on Wednesday. Now get out of here. Izuku began gathering up his things when he noticed the magenta-haired student quietly approached his desk. It's Midoriya, right? He looked up sharply before cautiously nodding. I'm Iwatani. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. I assumed you had an analysis quirk. That doesn't make it right, and I'm sorry. I'm just a little jaded about people deciding how to live their lives based on their quirks. People do tend to judge people's capabilities and intelligence on their quirks, Izuku acknowledged. It's something that really needs to be addressed. Iwatani nodded furiously. I actually want to compile biographies of people who live life unconventionally in terms of their quirks. I'd love to read it someday. She smiled wickedly. Maybe I'll have to write a sequel about quirkless people and feature you. Oh, my story isn't really interesting, Izuku mumbled. Somehow I doubt that. The author of Analysis 18 clearly has something to say, Iwatani said, eyes gleaming. What is Analysis 18? He asked, a little exasperated. Everyone keeps referencing it. It's an analysis of present Mike that Dr. Meiji read to the class to show us that our analyses are lacking, Iwatani explained. He kind of held it over our heads, telling us that the author had the same amount of formal training as we did. You did what? Izuku yelled, looking at the professor with utter betrayal. I wrote that when I was 13, it's basically 5 pages of me being a fanboy. It's brilliant, Dr. Meiji argued. Truly, a work of art. Izuku groaned before standing to join the professor, waving Iwatani goodbye. When he turned to continue his complaint, he found Meiji staring at him with a brow raised. You didn't strike me as a fanny pack type man, Midoriya. In truth, Izuku liked the fanny pack. It was a bright yellow that almost matched his backpack. He was just a little embarrassed about the context of the fanny pack. When he had last been at the station, Tsukauchi did give him more information about what to expect in Hosu. However, he wouldn't let Izuku leave. Instead, he called Officer Kondo in, who walked in, fanny pack in hand. Kondo sat directly opposite Izuku, placing the thing on the desk between them. As you are going to a larger, unfamiliar city and you get into more trouble than should be statistically possible, the station all pitched in to get you this. Saito and Sasaki have dubbed it the Don't Rape Me kit. It currently consists of a whistle, pepper spray, a knife with a sheath that can be worn in multiple discrete places, and a flashlight taser. All of these items are legal to use in self-defense when the need arises. Izuku had choked, cheeks burning with embarrassment. It's called what? The Don't Rape Me kit. Officer Nakamura proposed we call it the Save My Fanny Pack, but Sasaki and Saito vetoed it. The rest of us didn't care what we called it, as long as it keeps you alive. He had stared at Kondo for a long while, silently willing her to claim it was all a joke, but no such claim came. It was very real, and apparently he was not allowed to go to Hosu without it. Izuku had half wondered if they put a tracking device in it because the officers kept ominously insisting they would know if he didn't have it with him. But they were probably just joking, that would be ridiculous. Snapping back to the present, Izuku stammered, it was a gift. The professor looked a little more closely at Izuku's shirt. It was his favorite t-shirt. Actually, the more that I think on it, the fanny pack seems to me exactly something you would wear. Thanks? They wound through campus to a set of dorms. Meiji handed Izuku a key card. If you go through these doors, your room is the first on the left. You're welcome to stay here anytime, but especially when you come to visit me. Izuku bit his lip. I didn't know I needed to bring things to furnish the room. Would he even have a blanket to use tonight? Oh, don't worry about that, go see, the professor urged. When Izuku swiped the key card, the door opened easily. It was easily recognizable as a college dorm room, but softer, toned down. It was inviting, the bed covered in a fluffy blue comforter and overstuffed pillows. A desk was already stocked with notebooks, paper, and writing utensils. A mini fridge hummed in the corner, and a shiny TV hung on the wall. Izuku flushed. This is too much. You really didn't have to do this, just a bed would have been fine. Midoriya, Dr. Meiji said, you're one of the most brilliant students I've ever taught, but you're also 15 years old. I want to put your mind at ease, but I also want to assure your mother that you are being taken care of. Settle in, relax. Call your mother. I have another class to teach, but tonight I'll treat you to dinner outside of campus as this is the only night I can. I admire your dedication to become a police officer, but I can't help but resent that Tsuragame gets to steal you away. Izuku nodded faintly, a little overwhelmed. He faintly remembered Dr. Meiji mentioning that he did occasionally work with the police. He idly wondered if the professor knew Detective Tsukauchi. It seemed like Tsukauchi could be called across the country for a difficult case at a moment's notice. He felt like Meiji might have mentioned something about it, but it was hard to remember when his interactions with the man had only been over email and the occasional video chat to discuss a particular analysis. His phone buzzed with a text. It was from Saito. He was always at least the tiniest bit hesitant to open her texts. She was just so unpredictable. Don't let Chief Dogface talk you into moving to Hosu. You belong with our station. Attached was a picture of whoever happened to be on duty at the moment. Saito had an arm slung around Nakamura's shoulders, Tamakawa and Soma idly waving, and Mori was in the background, looking miserable in the meter-maid vest. Izuku smiled. He was nervous to meet Chief Suragame tomorrow, but if he was half as welcoming as Izuku's station, Izuku would be in good hands.